Welcome. Thanks for coming out tonight to the Whalen Library. Thanks for coming on Zoom. We are excited to have Kelly Brotzman here from the Prison Book Program to teach us about their work. Prior to joining the program, Kelly spent 20 years in higher ed, teaching classes about social justice, poverty, and inequality. She has a PhD in ethics from the University of Chicago. And her passion for supporting people in prison comes from her experiences teaching college classes in prisons and volunteering with incarcerated students. Thank you, Kelly, for being here tonight. Just a couple housekeeping notes. We are recording this, and it will be available on YouTube and Waycam, our local cable access. If you're joining us on Zoom and you have a question, put it in the chat, and I will raise my hand and ask Kelly for you. So, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me out tonight. Happy Banned Books Week. This is Banned Books Week. If you're interested in banned books, you want to learn about prisons and books in prisons, because the bans that we see in prisons are extraordinarily large compared to the bans we're seeing in communities and schools these days. So I'm going to sort of go in two steps. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about the phenomenon of mass incarceration, and then I'm going to talk about access to books in that context. So it's going to be kind of depressing, and then it'll be very, very happy at the end. So when I use the phrase mass incarceration, and it's important because not everyone uses this phrase in the same way, I am talking about the quadrupling to quintupling of prison and jail populations that occurred basically in a 40-year period. But really started in the early 80s. We peaked in 2009 in terms of the size of our prison population. It was really a 4.5-fold increase in that short period of time. And so you can kind of see here, this is the number of people in prison. We peaked at 2.3 million in 2008. We're now down, this is a little bit old, we're now down to about 1.9 million. This is a rate, so this is controlling for population. Again, we peaked at about 1,000 people per 100,000 residents of the country, adult residents. So they remove children from the picture there. We're down now around in the 700s in terms of the incarceration rate. So you can kind of see this goes back to like 1925. So we were pretty constant for about 50 years in terms of the rate at which we incarcerated men. Women are down here, and this is the average here, the red one. And you can just see, whoosh, way, way, way up. We typically had about 150 people in prison per 100,000 U.S. adult residents. And the other thing I like to point out about mass incarceration is it wasn't like an accident, like, whoops, we just ended up with all these people in prison. It was a policy choice, and it was a bipartisan one, totally bipartisan. The two main drivers of this massive increase were sentencing law and drug law. So the Sentencing Reform Act, these would have been the Reagan years, right, 84. But the 1994 VCC-LEA stands for Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. Who was president in 1994? Those were the Clinton years, right? And this is what they call the omnibus crime bill. Every so often, the U.S. does like an omnibus bill on agriculture, just like everything we need to do on transportation, agriculture. And this was a crime bill, an omnibus crime bill. And this was probably the single biggest piece of legislation responsible for mass incarceration. Do we want to guess at who its primary author was? No. Primary author of that bill, whose office was primarily responsible for drafting it. Here's a hint. He's currently the president. That was a Biden bill. His office authored it. And so what that bill did was basically offer states huge amounts of money, billions and billions of dollars, to build more prisons if they adopted certain changes at the state level. That is, lengthen sentences, eliminate discretion for judges, make sentences mandatory, adopt things like 3 strikes and you're out, which is mandatory life sentence for any 3 felonies, even if they're all committed together. if they would abolish parole. We still have parole in Massachusetts, so I like to point out that that is not the case in about 35 states. There just simply is no parole. States in the 90s, many states abolished parole in order to get the federal money. As one of the steps they could take to get this federal money to build a lot more prisons. And so thank you, Joe Biden, and then also all these 1980, those are sort of the Reagan years. So that's what I mean when I say it was a bipartisan policy choice. We all of a sudden decided in this country, we're going to incarcerate way more people for way longer than ever before in our history. This is historically unprecedented, and by the way, also globally anomalous. No other country has tried such a policy experiment. And so this is a piece from the Prison Policy Initiative, and I really like their work because they're actually a research outfit out of Western Mass, because they include both jail and prison. Who knows the difference between jail and prison? Jails are run by localities, either cities or counties, and sometimes in very sparsely populated places, regional, whole regions. But prisons are run by the state and federal government, and look how big of a piece of the pie jails are. It's 500,000 people. And of those people, I don't know if you can read this is really small. This portion here, not convicted. These people are legally innocent. 70% of the people in jail on any given day are there waiting. They're pre-trial. They're waiting. 70% of the 500,000. So this says 427. This might be 2023 data. No, this is 2024 data. So of this 514,000, 427,000 of them are legally innocent. Why are they in jail? Well, they're in jail waiting for their charges to be resolved, either through a plea bargain, by being dismissed, by the DA's office. And they're there either because the judge has decided not to grant them liberty pretrial through a bail bond. Most people are given a bail of some amount, right? They either didn't get a bail or they did get a bail, but they can't afford it. I read a statistic that about half of those people waiting in jail have a bail that would cost them $2,000 or less, and they can't afford it. So they stay in jail 3-4 years sometimes, waiting. They're there waiting, okay? Only 88,000 of that 514,000 are actually doing their time. And they're doing their time usually 3 years or less, it's shorter amounts of time, on lesser charges. So prison would be where you would go after you were convicted. So no one in prison is pre-trial, right? You're there doing time, usually 3 years or more. And the other thing I like to point out is when we hear about reform these days, we are mostly hearing about it at the federal level. The First Step Act and, the Second Chance and so on. But federal law can only affect this slice. It can only affect people in federal prisons. So until we see states acting, we're not going to see mass decarceration. In order to see mass decarceration, states have to act. This is the smallest piece. And the other thing I like to point out is that the defining feature of state prisons and state crimes is crimes of violence, and really the federal system is distinguished by having the most people in for drug crimes. Because most drug laws are federal laws. So, and then there's these other random, you've got juvies, territorial prisons, Guam, Puerto Rico, that sort of thing. ICE is no small part. Involuntary commitment, this is an interesting thing. Anyone heard of civil commitment? This is continuing to be incarcerated after your sentence is up, which does happen and is perfectly legal. There's a debate about whether it's constitutional. We have civil commits at a place called Bridgewater State Hospital in Massachusetts. That's people who've done their time, their sentence is up, but because a judge somewhere has said they're dangerous, they continue to be incarcerated, usually for their whole lives. So, for perspective, I like to put this in context. These are the 9 largest cities in the United States by population. If we add in prisons and jails, we're talking about the 5th largest city in the United States. all people in prison and jails together make up the 5th largest city in the United States. We think, oh, Massachusetts is so nice. We're probably an exception to this. No. So while we incarcerate in Massachusetts at a much lower rate than the country as a whole, we're still incarcerating at 3 to 4 times the rate of other wealthy, developed countries. Look at Canada, 104 per 100,000 people. We're still up at 275. Norway, and I took a trip to Iceland last April, and we drove past one of their prisons, and so then I did some research when I came home, and they have 150 people in prison. In Iceland, of course, they only have 350,000 people in their whole country, but it's a very small country, but they incarcerate at a very low rate. So this is very, well, not as fresh. I should have refreshed this probably, but the state has a fun new tool if you're a dork like me and you're interested in this data. But basically, we've got about 5,300 people in our state prisons in Massachusetts. About 5,300 people, and about 6,300 people in, we call our jails in Massachusetts houses of correction. So when you hear house of correction, you're talking about a jail. So all told, there's another 2,000 people in federal prison who had an address in Massachusetts prior to being incarcerated. So we're talking about maybe 14,000 people. It is expensive. If you leave here with one thing, know this. Prison is one of the most expensive things we do as a society. More expensive than health care, housing, higher education, other really expensive things. So in fiscal 23, the DOC's budget was $730 million, give or take. For, again, 5,300 people, that comes out to $137,000 per inmate per year. That's even more than Harvard, right? Although Harvard's up there now, aren't they in the 90s or something, like 90,000 a year? The state is the primary funder of jails in Massachusetts because counties don't have a way of raising revenue. So the state gave $640 million to houses of corrections, sheriffs. A little less per inmate, but it's still an awful lot. We're still talking about 6 figures per person per year. So my dad is an old military man, and he did a stint at the Pentagon where he was, pricing out new weapon systems and so on for high generals and everything. And he had this saying, he said, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money, And so it's a lot of money. It's $1.5 billion that we're spending on incarceration. And this is just Massachusetts, which has a very small prison profile, you could say. The national price tag, nobody knows. Nobody knows. Between every jail, every prison, no one has any idea how much all the local, state, and federal governments are spending on this. But it's a lot. And let me tell you, the results aren't great. So, are you familiar with the term recidivism? It means going back to incarceration after exiting incarceration. So you can kind of see, as you go along, it levels off, but in the first 2 years out, a full 2/3 are going to return to incarceration. So I always say, as a thought experiment, what would happen if our high schools were failing to graduate 2/3 of the students? What do you think would happen? We'd be in the streets. We'd be demanding, burn it down and start over, right? This isn't working. Something's not working. And we see this incredibly high failure rate. Can you imagine why recidivism is so high? Obviously, if you had 4 or fewer prior arrests prior to being incarcerated, your recidivism is a little less, but it's still, within 60 months, which is the standard time period for measuring recidivism, it's over half. And for people with more arrests, it's like 85%. Can you imagine why it would be so high? Prison must suck, right? You really don't want to go back. You probably really don't want to go back. So why are so many people going back?
Because if nothing changes, they're going to go back to the same situation.
They'll go back into the same situation.
Skills or lack thereof.
Maybe they didn't have a great job opportunities or employment or income opportunities. The same thing may be true when they come out. That is true. Employment barriers, we do reentry really poorly in this country. No one can quite figure out how to do reentry well. There is no jurisdiction that I'm aware of that does it well. It's very difficult, and it really would cost a lot if we did it correctly. But another big driver here is untreated addiction. If I commit the following crime, I'm addicted to heroin, you have a convenience store, and I put a Snickers bar in my pocket, and I go up to you in your convenience store and I say, give me all your money. I'm not going to be classified as a drug criminal. I'm going to be classified as a violent criminal. So a lot of violent crime, people who are in for so-called violent crimes, and I will be charged as an armed robber. That will be an armed robbery, whether I had a car or a gun, whether it was a toy gun, it doesn't matter. I'm going to be an armed robber. And so a lot of people who are arrested for so-called violent crimes are driven by addiction. And addiction treatment, when we think about the gold standard on addiction treatment, what is it? It's inpatient, right? It's long-term, minimum 90 days. Medication assisted, right? I mean, we kind of know what works now in terms of addiction treatment. What kind of addiction treatment do you think you're going to get in prison? That kind? You're going to get, at the most, a 12-step group, probably facilitated by a fellow inmate, not a trained clinician, and you may get Suboxone for withdrawal from opioids. You may. That would be the absolute most, and very few jails actually offer the Suboxone. So untreated addictions is a major one. But the other thing is something that's called collateral consequences. So, and this is basically the consequence beyond just the jail or prison sentence. I just pulled a few for fun, but this is in Massachusetts. When I come out with any felony on my record, any felony, I can't register to be an architect. It's just written into our laws. We write these collateral consequences into our laws, and that is going to be mandatory and automatic. So in other words, if I wanted to be an architect, I can't be an architect. And it's indefinite, meaning it doesn't end. So this is just one of potentially 400 to 500 limitations on what happens to you when you come out with a felony conviction. If I wanted to start a pot shop, marijuana establishment license, and probably there are many incarcerated people who would be excellent pot shop managers, having worked in the trade prior to incarceration, no chance. Mandatory, automatic, I must be denied a pot shop license. And that will last forever. I can't attend the harbor master training program. Sorry, that's mandatory. No SNAP. No SNAP. No food stamps. Mandatory. If I have a felony on my record, I cannot get nutrition assistance. And you see the length over here varies. You can apply to have it for a waiver to that. But you can't do that for like the first 5 years. So we take away public benefits, we take away public supports, and we expect people to succeed. Ineligible to vote. That's in Massachusetts for any felony. That's mandatory, but again, it's time limited. So I think it's 5 years, 60 months. You can apply after 60 months after release to get your voting rights back. Can't be on a jury, right? That one too is time limited. So there's a host of these collateral consequences that basically corrode the opportunity ecosystem that you come out into. There are a host of opportunities that are just systematically closed off. So that's the other driver of those very high recidivism numbers. Now, this is not controversial anymore. For a while in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, there were criminal justice scholars and researchers who were like, what actually works? What actually works to fix people so that when they come out of incarceration, they don't go back? We actually know the answer to this now. it is education. The single most effective intervention that you can provide someone during a term of incarceration to prevent them from going back is education. It's one of those things where it's like, really? You had to research this? I mean, it's so obvious, right? It's like, yes, I understand we had academic fights about this, but obviously it's education. The RAND Corporation did a meta-analysis of like all the studies that had been done and came to this conclusion. So, there's really no debate about this anymore. The single best thing you can do while people are in there is educate them. Education is also very much needed in prison. This is more from PPI. But if you look at the general population, only 12% of the free world population doesn't have a high school diploma. Pretty small group of people, right? 12% of people don't have a high school credential. In prison, it's over half. Over half who do not have that high school level education. Higher for Hispanics and blacks, a little bit less, but still 52% of white people in prison do not have a high school education. So you would think that if we know what works, and it's education, and it's needed, there would be a lot of it. Right? That's the thing that works. So jails are not legally obligated to provide any kind of services. They don't have to provide education. They don't have to provide libraries. They don't have to provide anything, really. They just have to provide emergency medical interventions. The healthcare, it's really a very low standard. In prison, federal and state prisons, you will generally find these offerings of some kind. ABE is basically like primary school for adults. It's basic reading and numeracy. And you'll generally, when you enter a prison, you'll take a diagnostic, an educational diagnostic that says where you should be placed. And ABE would be like for people who can't read or write. And then you'll see that the HiSET, the high school equivalency test or GED, generally speaking, sometimes you'll have ESL. If you're lucky, you'll have ESL. And if you're lucky, you'll have something besides that high school credential. Adult continuing education, some form of education. Maybe a vocational class, maybe it's, a self-help group, maybe it's, it could be a variety of things. And post-secondary college has been largely unavailable. Thank you, Joe Biden, because one of the things in the 94 Omnibus Crime Bill that he wrote said incarcerated people can no longer have eligibility for Pell Grants. Who knows what a Pell Grant is?
Government grant to college.
It's the federal government's primary form of support for low-income students for post-secondary education. It's not a lot. It tops out, I think today, around $7,500. So it's not going to pay for like Harvard or anything. But back before 94, you used to see the lower cost higher education providers, your community colleges, they would have whole campuses inside large prison complexes. Because the Pell Grant, while it's only $7,500, that could get you a couple community college classes, right? That would at least be a revenue source for the community college. That all went away after 94. The good news is that this academic year, they're eligible again. The federal DOE did a big study, said, what bad things happen if we make incarcerated people eligible again for Pell Grants? And so they did an experimental initiative at a few prisons. It turns out nothing bad happens, only good things happen. So they are once again eligible for Pell Grants, but it's going to take a few years for the providers to really ramp back up to where they were prior to 94. And what does that leave? That leaves you with self-education. And I have spent a lot of time with incarcerated people and know a lot of incarcerated people, and I've been in many, many prisons. This is the largest form of education that happens inside prisons and jails. It's not formal education. It's not in a classroom with a trained teacher. It's you in your cell with a book. This is the largest form of education. This is sort of funny because you're young. Do you know what a correspondence course is? They used, back in the olden days, they used to have these things where you took the college class all through the mail. all through the mail. Do you remember those? Antique. Well, in the internet era, correspondence courses just sort of went down the drain. There's still 2 providers, one Adams State in Colorado, but it costs money and very few people can really take advantage of it. That leaves you with your library, your institution's library, and your own personal books to read. And this applies again in Massachusetts. This is based on some great reporting that GBH did. Massachusetts Department of Corrections has 4,065 people on the wait list for any education class. And they have 886 people enrolled in education classes. Why so few? Can you guess? It's the staffing. It's the staffing. They've got 39 academic teachers. That would be adult basic and high set, right? 39 academic teachers system-wide. We've got 12 state prisons in Massachusetts. We just lost one in Concord. And plus, who here, anyone teachers, retired teachers? Working? Yeah? In Massachusetts, to get anywhere near a classroom, my husband's a public school teacher, you need a master's degree, you need student teaching, you need credentials, you need MTELs, you need all kinds of things, right? You have to be a professional. And do you really want to be in a classroom with perhaps 40 adult students, all different levels of needs, interventions that they need? You could be teaching everything from basic reading to algebra. Is that really what you want from your teaching career, from your illustrious professional teaching career? When you could, as my husband does, go teach in Cohasset, have all these lovely, affluent kids in your classroom without any real serious, needs. It's a crappy job. It's a crappy job. And so people with, again, master's degrees in professional training, it's very difficult to recruit them to work in the prisons. It's very difficult to recruit them. Industrial arts, 35 teachers. Again, you could work in the trades out here in the free world and write your own ticket, you make a ton of money. So it's the staffing, and it's very difficult. I will just say that, prison is a depressing place to work. It doesn't matter what you're doing in there, whether you're the CEO or whether you're an educator. It's a depressing place, So let's talk about access to books. In jails, very little, very little. Again, the jail is not legally required to provide a library. Here in some of our larger houses of corrections, we do have them. South Bay has it's a decent library. That's the big one in Boston. In prisons, generally there will be a library. Now, it varies widely quality-wise. Your library could be that shelf, that rolling shelf. That could be your whole institution's library. I've been in the Norfolk Library. That's our largest prison in Massachusetts, 1,200 men there. It's about 2 times the size of this room. About 2 times the size of this room. Shelves to the ceiling and a few spinny things in the middle. I would estimate maybe they have 50,000 books. Maybe. But 50,000 books, 1,200 men, and they tend to be pulp fiction, because those are the cheapest books. If I want an up-to-date 2024 guide to passing the commercial driving license test, I'm not going to find that in my prison's library. But that's a useful resource, The quality of the librarians is different. Again, our librarians out here in the free world, they've got their masters in library science, and they're professionals, trained professionals. You may or may not have a trained librarian. When COVID came too, all the librarians were laid off. They were the first people laid off. Because, it's already risky, it's congregate living, and getting everyone to the library is no, major no. It's been very difficult getting them back. Very difficult getting them to come back. Same story. Do you want to work in a lovely free world library with all kinds of resources, or do you want to be in a library where you have no acquisitions budget? If you have a library degree, what are you going to want to do? Like anything, going to the library is a privilege that can be taken away. what we're hearing from the people who write to us is that they're reopened, but like maybe 4 hours a month. Or like maybe one librarian is covering 6 facilities, and has to drive around. And, they have, you have your allotted 15 minutes and you've got to sign up like 2 weeks in advance. And you maybe can only check out 2 things per time that you go there. And it's not open to all housing units. Just because your facility has a library doesn't mean you can go to it. There's generally speaking something called secure housing or restricted housing, which is the jail inside the jail for people who were bad or just people who got framed for something bad. Generally speaking, they can't go to the library. That leaves you with maybe your friends and family. You can't send a book if you have a loved one inside. You can't just take a book off your shelf from home and send it in. You would need to use an online retailer and have it shipped to your loved one. And this is very difficult for 2 reasons. Incarcerated people disproportionately come from low-income communities, and paying full retail price for books these days is no joke. And prison as we do it currently in America, purposefully, by design, crushes the connections that people have to the outside world. It strains them to the breaking point. And so very few people, I once had a prison warden tell me, only 10% of the people in my prison ever have a visitor. There's just so many people in there with really no one on the outside. No one that they could go to and say, hey, can you buy me a book? So that's where we come in. That's where our prison book program comes in. We've been doing this for 52 years. Last year, we sent over 65,000 books to a little over 18,000 people. Our average package, and I should have brought one, I have one in my car, is a 3-pound package. So it usually has 3 to 4 books in it, and an assortment of print resources. We have those too. The books in each package are hand-selected by volunteers. There's just 2 of us on staff, so volunteers really power our organization. They go through our library and match each reader's interests. And we serve over 1,000 facilities in all 50 states, as well as Puerto Rico and Guam. We actually just filled one for a Navy brig in Japan today. So if you're an American incarcerated, we will serve you. Last year, over 1,400 individual people volunteered with us, contributing more than 12,000 hours of their time. We hosted 82 groups from lots of different organizations. Just today, I hosted Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts for a corporate session. So this is our library. So on the left is the nonfiction room. On the right is the fiction room. We have about 15,000 to 20,000 books on our shelves at any given moment, but they're constantly changing. What's on them is constantly changing. This gentleman here is what we call a picker. So he's holding a letter from an incarcerated person, and he's going to be a personal shopper for his requester and get the best books for that person that he can. This is later in the process. This is where the books are being wrapped up for the mail by other volunteers, packers. And on the right here, she is processing our incoming mail. We get over 25,000 letters a year. So we always need that incoming mail processed. We mark up every request with all the rules we know about at that facility so that we can send books that will get into the hands of the requester. If you love sorting through books, touching books, playing with books, the book sorting room is for you. This is the kitchen where all the incoming book donations get sorted, categorized, and ready to be shelved. Some books we can't use, and this is just one of the many groups that came to volunteer with us. Over the years, we've collected, literally millions. It's literally millions by now, over 52 years. Keeping those books out of the landfill, as you know, books do not decompose very quickly or well. People buy books from our wish lists. We have 8 at independent local bookstores, and we have one on Amazon. There's a very small slice of books that we send out that we actually directly purchase. And those are college-level dictionaries, which is the number 1 request. Has always been for 52 years and still is. Number 1 request is a college-level dictionary. Can you imagine why? They're specific, too, college level. Very few people are going to take the college entrance test. If you're in prison, you have a lot of court papers. Do court papers have a lot of big words in them? Yeah, they do. And it's also the key that unlocks every other book. If you have a good dictionary, it opens up any other book you might want to read. And a lot of people just want to make their letters home like prettier, nicer, more elegant. We also buy the only GED book that doesn't require a website. Almanacs are tremendously popular in prison. Imagine your life without Google. An almanac is the next best thing. Nobody buys almanacs anymore or donates them because you have a supercomputer in your pocket, right? You don't need an almanac. The most common restrictions that prisons enact, and it's always down to the warden. The warden decides what comes in. Only 15% of prisons will take a hardback book. A lot of prisons will not take any used books, which is really hard for us because 80% of our books are used. They figure it's easier to stash contraband in a used book than in a new book. We carry blank composition notebooks. A lot of places will not let us send those, usually because they sell that particular item through their commissary. There's a little store in every prison called the canteen or the commissary. They don't want them getting it for free through us because they get a percentage of all the sales through commissary to help fund the prison. Georgia for years had this thing, no black power. That's when we would violate, that we would conscientiously violate. No trade skill books, no computer books, nothing that could help someone conduct a business while incarcerated. Technically, it's illegal to conduct a business while you're incarcerated. But the people who are writing to us for business books are thinking about release. They're not looking to conduct a business while they're incarcerated. A lot of times there's special packaging requirements. You got to wrap it in paper. You got to wrap it in plastic. A lot of times they don't want any stickers or Sharpie on the books, which if I get a bunch of books here, I'm going to have to de-sticker all those books. And a lot of times when we get remaindered books, if you work in a bookstore, what do you do when you remainder a bunch of books? You take a Sharpie down the pages, right? So we get a lot of books that way. A lot of times there's a maximum number of books that the person can have in their cell, and there's a maximum they can get per shipment. Florida right now has no drawing books, no how to draw, because they could use it in tattooing. Prison tattooing is a well-established cultural practice inside carceral facilities. It will not stop because they do not have access to drawing books. They'll just make worse tattoos. I mean, they're going to tattoo each other regardless of whether they have drawing books or not. No books in languages other than English or acquiring another language. The idea here is, if they could communicate in another language, the guards couldn't understand. They could get up to nefarious business. Nothing with any maps in it, even of fictional places. Maps equal escape. And there's a lot more. These are some real rejections. This is Banned Books Week, right? These are some real rejections. Sexually explicit. It turns out it's a book about being gay. And LGBT books are much more likely to be flagged for being sexually explicit, even when they're factual. Even when they're just factual books. Electronics, no electronics books. Shows how to make electronic devices, which could pose a threat to the security. All the locks in these facilities are electronic now. That's not like a key. So they're worried about people fiddling with the locks. Elijah Muhammad's New World, Nation of Islam, contains inflammatory racist references, calls for acts of violence, rebellion, and taking a stand. God forbid we have any of that. Again, African-American, Black Power type of literature is much more likely to be flagged for security reasons. Blacksmithing. Nope, no blacksmithing books. There was a stain on the book. Stain on the book. Nope, can't have the book with a stain on it. Home improvement. 250 step-by-step projects. Walls and ceilings, finishing wallboard, cutting wallboard. They'll tell you that it's because they don't want them messing with the facility. Believe that if you want to. Spanish-English dictionary. Very popular to learn Spanish. May be used to communicate without officers' comprehension. And here's my favorite. This is my all-time favorite. Copy of Lord of the Rings with a map of Middle-earth. Black and white map of Middle-earth. No pictures. Could lead to escape.
What staff is taking the time to write that?
The mailroom staff. The mailroom staff. I know Terry Goodkind is a very popular fantasy author. I don't know much about him, but this just wouldn't be good for this person because he's incarcerated for crimes of a sexual nature. I don't know what the book is, but, it's a fantasy book. So those are just some real rejection notices. They come in probably 30 a month or so. I was at the Boston Public Library on Tuesday, and I brought a handful of real rejection notices with us. They're kind of comical, actually. What we always need is gently used paperbacks. The most frequently requested and seldom donated. So this is our code red categories right here. Genre fiction, foreign language. Sometimes they don't necessarily keep out the foreign language books, and it's a very popular hobby. There are many prisons where we can get them in. Taking up an art. So you also have our art show displayed here at Wayland, and so people send us their artwork. They want to be givers as well as receivers. So all of this art has been sent to Prison Book Program over the course of our 52-year history. And there's a few pieces upstairs as well. LGBTQ, fiction, nonfiction. Generally on the art, it's the less equipment, the better. The less equipment you need. So not like oil painting, but like sketching, illustration, drawing. Manga, very popular. Graphic novels and comics. I was talking to people earlier about the non-mainstream religions, niche religions, unconventional religions. Crafts and hobbies, especially origami and crochet. Again, less on the equipment. I'm told that you can crochet on your fingers. But you don't need needles. But the big fat plastic crochet needles are permitted in some women's prisons and low security prisons. And then just general health and wellness. I don't probably need to tell you this, but the healthcare in there stinks. People are just looking to keep themselves well and healthy and avoid the medical care. Most people I know who are incarcerated want to stay away from medical. The standard for malpractice is so low. But especially mental health, recovery, addiction, those sorts of things, we can always use this sort of material. Our patrons, I can explain this if you want, call us Lucy. There's a reason for that. Our program is basically known as Lucy, but this is just one of the thousands and thousands of thank you notes that we get every year. Prison Book Program, or Lucy, is an absolutely incredible program. Because of COVID, time in prison has been insanely difficult. We're locked in our cells 18 to 22 hours a day with no programs. Library closed. I wrote a letter explaining our difficulties, and within 31 days, 5 books appeared at my cell. I will share these works with all the guys. We will all benefit from Lucy's incredible generosity. Lifesaver. You guys are amazing. I'm so grateful you're doing God's work. This is one thing I like to point out. You and I, a book is just a book, right? It's some paper with some ink on it, and we either like it or we don't like it. We probably have hundreds of them. We have hundreds of books, right? In prison, a book is a survival tool. It really is. We hear from readers all the time that books are how they do their time. It's just how they survive. So it means so much more. It takes on such an elevated importance for an incarcerated person than to us out here. Anyone can get involved. You can volunteer with us. We have 200 volunteer sessions a year. We're there 4 times a week, 2 evenings and 2 afternoons. We're like the easiest place to volunteer in Greater Boston. All you have to do is sign up. There's no paperwork. There's no Corey. There's no nothing. You just go to our website and sign up. That's really all you do. All of our tasks you can be trained on them in 5 minutes or less. You can collect books if you want. Host a book drive. You can collect books here through the Friends. Going back to this stuff we always need. You can pull stuff out. Invite us at the end of your book sale. We'll take stuff away at the end, stuff that hasn't sold, and that way you don't have to box it up for the next year. You can buy books from our wish lists. When somebody needs a book, we just can't even get close enough to. We go for close enough, not for perfect. But they just have a legitimate study interest, and we don't have anything close. We post it to our Amazon wish list. So if you go to our Amazon wish list right now, you'll see some very interesting special requests. Someone needs a Hebrew-English dictionary. I think I was on there just the other day. We take money. We're a nonprofit, so we take money too. You can follow us on social media. We're also now on TikTok, I think, and YouTube. We have merch. We have merch on our website. You can help out that way. But mostly what you can do is advocate. Talk to your people. Talk to your county people, your town people, your state legislators about the importance of books and education in prison. And it should not be as hard as it is to get books in there. That's our website. You could sign up to volunteer here. Wish lists, all of our wish lists. This one would contain all the specially requested books. So you can just dial up our website there. Any questions? That's a lot, I know.
Where are you?
We're in Quincy Center, right off the Red Line stop. And the very, very large stone church in which John Adams is buried. John and Abigail and John Quincy and his wife are literally my next door neighbors, my office. I have an office, they're next door. They're mostly quiet.
Never get out of the basement.
No. Sometimes I think I hear something and then I'm like, nah.
The list of genres and stuff, is that on your website also?
Yes, so if you go here to donate books, you will see a very similar list to what I just showed you on the PowerPoint. And go to book guidelines. There's a page called book guidelines. We take books on a walk-in basis anytime we are having a volunteer session, which again is many, many times a year. You can mail us books. If you can't make it to Quincy Center, you can mail us your books media mail. You just go to contact us. That's where you would find our mailing address. Again, you can go to the wish lists and donate. All those wish lists are stocked with books that we just always need and that never come in enough quantity for donors. So like almanacs are on there. If you like supporting local business, go to one of the locals. But it's really fun to fulfill a special request because it'll say, Juan in New Mexico needs this book, and you know that you just made Juan's life a little bit better. So, yeah. Any questions on any aspect of this?
I have a question about more just general incarceration. I feel like I heard last year that the federal government was going to be ending or decreasing the monetary incentives for private prisons. Is that something that
It has
started
happened.
in effect?
It has happened. So, the federal government, now let's talk about private prisons. Very few people are in private prisons. And the ones that are, it's about 8%. The ones that are, they're not owned by the private company. They're owned by the state or by the jurisdiction, by the government. And the private operator has a contract to run it. They're under management contracts. Private prisons do tend to be worse. They do tend to be worse. Read the book American Prison by Shane Bauer. He signed up to work as a guard at one of these private prisons in Louisiana for a year. It's pretty astonishing. But the federal government has decided that it will no longer use private operators to manage its facilities. So there are no more contracts with private prison operators in the Bureau of Prisons, which is the federal slice. But remember, that slice is pretty small. It's only 200,000 of the 1.9 million. So in many states have decided not to use private operators, but as you can imagine, states vary greatly, and some states love private operators. Tennessee and Louisiana come to mind. The private prison operation business model, was really cooked up in Tennessee. CoreCivic, which used to be the Corrections Corporation of America and the largest operator in this market sector, is still there, still based in Tennessee, runs several Tennessee facilities. And increasingly, the biggest customer for private operators is ICE. Because if you're ICE, you need a company that can stand up a facility quickly. Do you know how long it takes to build a prison? Like 10 years. It takes forever because the architecture is just very challenging. You've got to think about, security and perimeters and all that kind of stuff. But a private prison operator can put up a few fences and make a few cages pretty quick, right? And so ICE routinely calls on the private operators to do that, particularly around border places.
I'm assuming that wasn't impacted. I'm assuming that wasn't impacted by that legislation.
No, it wasn't. It was only BOP. I call it BOP, the Bureau of Prisons, the Federal Bureau of Prisons. It was only BOP that decided to stop using them. ICE still does.
Do you end up with a list of popular authors?
Yes. The authors that are popular are pretty much the same as the ones out here. People love their David Baldaccis, their Daniel Silvas, their, who's the romance writer, Fern Michaels, or, the popular, although you notice romance was not on our list. Most romance is written for straight white women. Straight white women are not who's populating the women's prisons of America. Now, gay romance, definitely. LGBT, or featuring characters of color. Yes, we'll take that. Generally speaking, we get way more romance in the door than we can use. And, sorry, I just lost track of your question. Popular authors, yes. So, Stephen King, enormously popular. Any kind of, who's the vampire lady from Louisiana? Anne Rice, very popular. And like I say, your thriller writers. But what we find is that literary fiction, what I might call literary fiction, sometimes it skews what we call chick lit. Chick lit. We have less of a need for that. Things like general fiction, something that you just can't categorize as like a comedy or a drama or a thriller or something. General fiction is probably definitely lower down on the list of needs. But mystery writers, all the classic mystery writers are hugely popular. All the classic sci-fi writers, your Isaac Asimovs, your Robert B. Parker is very popular. Westerns are very popular. I didn't put Westerns on my list, but Westerns are enormously popular. People love a good Louis L'Amour. A good William Johnstone. Sometimes you can get the William Johnstones at the Dollar Tree for $1.25, and when I find them, I snap them up. Because we never have enough Westerns on our shelves. Military fiction, spies, army operations, those kinds of things. What we call sort of true adventure, like your Clive Cussler and your Harlan Coben and, all these, they're best-selling authors for a reason, and the people inside like them too. And then, on the nonfiction side, it's less about the author and more about the resource that it offers. And is it up to date? Is it up to date? Because chances are if they can get their hand on anything, it's out of date. Yeah.
Do you have any ideas about ways to motivate colleges and universities to get involved in providing educational opportunities?
Well, yes. So many colleges are, and Emerson is one. BU for a long time was offering a free bachelor's degree inside 2 Massachusetts prisons. They downgraded it to an 8-course certificate, which I was really mad at them for because I used to volunteer with that program. Boston College is offering the odd course here or there. Tufts is offering the odd course here or there. But it's only Emerson that's offering a full degree program. The thing is, right now they're doing it completely at their own expense because there's no Pell Grants. But by next year, they should have the paperwork in place where they can at least get that $7,500 per student. That's something. So now the college is not having a net negative. Like, Emerson's not a rich college. It's not a Harvard, right? So they need to see some financial benefit from this. So you can tell that person, they can let their college know that incarcerated people will have Pell Grants again. And so there will be at least some revenue source for the provider. And also, I would just say, from my own experience too, the students are amazing. The students are amazing. The best writer I've ever taught was an incarcerated student. Just an outstanding writer. Gorgeous prose. Beautiful writer. The students are interesting. They're diverse. They're different. The faculty who will go in and teach those classes will love it. They will love it. I've never known anyone who hasn't just, it's rocked their world. A college professor who goes in and, teaches these guys, and they're just like no other student, you've ever had. So it really, faculty love it. Students love it. The courses I taught inside were inside out, so they co-enrolled an equal number of preppy white Southern kids from my college and incarcerated men. And to see the interaction that took place and to see the sort of humanization that took place, the students, it was the best course most of them ever took, while they were in college. The students love it, too, if you do inside out, if you bring outside students in, too. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
I have an inside-out story.
Yeah.
At Framingham, Harvard went in their class behind bars, and there were, I think, 10 Harvard students, 10
Yeah.
students.
Yeah.
And the ending essay that they wrote, the inside people won.
I'm not surprised.
Included it in a book that she wrote.
Yeah.
It was so good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That does not surprise me at all. Because what's happened to most of these people is they were poorly served by education. It's not that they couldn't be educated. It's that they were very poorly served by education. There's so much latent talent. Look at this artwork. There's so much talent and ability behind bars. They just never had it offered in the correct way. And so what you find when you go, there's some amazing students in there. Amazing students in there. What's the other Zoom question?
How accessible are computers for those in jail to access online?
NA. So the internet might as well not exist for people in prison. Nowadays, that said, there is technology. So nowadays, virtually every incarcerated person has access to, in many places they have to buy it, a tablet device. It's like a real knockoff, droidy, cheap tablet device. And it's hooked up to an intranet within the prison. In other words, it's not the real internet. It's not the Wild West of the internet. It's a tiny little piece of the internet that the prison says they can access. And sometimes on those tablets, there's educational material. But it's generally not like a whole college class or a whole, it's generally like little micro courses, like how to become a food server or, like PDFs, basically, is what it is. It's reading through a bunch of PDFs. I've handled one of the tablets that are distributed in Massachusetts prisons. It's not great. It could be so much more. But it's a double-edged sword, too. The technology piece is a double-edged sword. So remember those depressing statistics about how few people are enrolled in education in Massachusetts prisons? The tablets are a great excuse for the DOC to do less in-person education because they say, oh, now everyone has access to education. Now everyone's enrolled in education because they have the tablet, which has, again, a few PDFs on there as classes, right? So it's a great excuse for them to scale back on what's really needed, which is in-person education with skilled educators. And so the devices have potential, though. It's also a great excuse if they put Project Gutenberg on those devices, which many do because it's free, it doesn't cost anyone anything, to limit access to outside books. It's like, well, you have Project Gutenberg on your tablet, but that's like Shakespeare, man. I mean, that's not what people are looking to read. It's all stuff in the public domain that you and I can get for free. And so they call it the National Corrections Library, but it's basically Project Gutenberg. Stuff whose copyright has expired. And so they can say, well, no more outside books because you've got Project Gutenberg. And we've seen that happen a few times. So the tablets, while they have great potential, there's also this downside. It's like it could also, if they only expanded access to books and didn't substitute for access to real books. Plus, some people have visual problems. They can't read on the tablet, or, some people's tablet is broken, or, people love paper books inside. They're not big on reading on the tablet. They want a paper book in their hand. So, yeah, we actually, for the first time, since I've been at PBP for 3 years, a blind woman wrote to us from North Carolina. And she said, the prison allows me to have a tape player. Cassette tape. Do you remember cassette tape? This is like circa 1980, right? But she has basically the equivalent of a Walkman, a 1980s Walkman. She said, can you send me books on tape? Well, we don't ordinarily carry that sort of thing. You can't even buy them anymore. But a very sweet volunteer went to eBay and got her 4 books on tape. So we sent those off to her. That's a first in my 3 years there. That was very satisfying to be able to do that. We get a lot of requests for large print. You know, the vision care in there stinks. The prison that I taught in Virginia, this was the vision care. The Lions Club comes to your prison once every other year with a bunch of donated glasses and dumps it on the floor, and you just try them all and see if any help you. That was the vision care program in this prison. So people need, you know, and people's eyes get bad. Our prison population is aging swiftly, too. It's really graying. So large print, anything in large print will take it, especially large print dictionaries and reference and things like that. Yeah. Okay, so selling books. We do, some books come in primarily hardcover fiction, which we just don't keep any hardcover fiction because we don't have any problem stocking our fiction shelves with paperbacks that we take to the used book superstore. Now, this is not rare or first edition stuff. There's nothing that says we couldn't similarly take things to, like, you know, Barrow Books or whatever is it over in Harvard, or the rare books and stuff, and realize the money from that. We haven't tried it, but it is an avenue that I think we could pursue. Particularly if, you know, we wouldn't want to send those kind of books in, but if we had a good, reliable relationship with a bookseller, with a rare bookseller, who was trustworthy, then yes. And I think we could develop, we've got enough relationships with bookstores locally that I think we could work that out with an antiquarian book dealer. It's a great idea. Tell that person it's a great idea. I love it. Send me your first editions. I'll take them over there myself. Anything else?
So they've sent this art over the years. Are you able to send like a note or a letter with the books, or is it just...
Yes. So in fact, that's one of our volunteer jobs. Every package that goes out has a packing slip, which is also a receipt. It's very important because it proves property. It proves that those books are yours and nobody else's. Books go missing a lot in property rooms, in prisons. And it's handwritten. Volunteers, and there's a place on there for a personal note. It's like 3 or 4 lines. But everyone gets a personal note with their package. And that actually means just as much as the books usually. That might be the only letter that person gets, that, you know, the whole year. We say they can write in 3 times a year. But it's the honor system. We don't really keep track. There's a lot of people who write in a lot more than that. We've got a lot of frequent flyers. So, yeah, there's invoicing is one of our most popular volunteer jobs because you get to write a note to the person. Most of these pieces, when I started a prison book program, I found in a box in a dark closet. They'd just been living there. So their origin stories are a little bit unclear to me. Some of these have come in my time. So for example, the graffiti-looking one there that says bookworm. And so those, I have more of the origin story. And so when I put them into the show, which is basically just taking it to be professionally framed, when I add them to the show, and we have 9 new pieces that are going in next month. It's going to be in Weston next month. I usually write them a note and say, hey, by the way, your piece was so stunning. And I'm sort of like the self-appointed curator of this art show because art is my hobby. Appreciating art is my hobby. But yeah, so I usually write them a little note and say, hey, your piece is in our show and you should put that on your resume or whatever. But if you want to be a pen pal to someone in prison, trust me, there is a long list of people who would love to be your pen pal. Those programs never have enough volunteers. They never have enough volunteers. People love a pen pal. We don't provide pen pal services, but every package comes with a note. Of course. My pleasure. Anytime you want to connect, just reach out to me. I'm on our staff page. If you have any questions, just email me. Thank you very much. We say 16 and up can come on their own. We prefer 16 and lower to be accompanied by an adult. But anyone of any age can volunteer. We have, like, sometimes it's great to have kids.